Future Imperfect, an anti-novel manifesto by Oscar Guardiola-Rivera. 1. Who are these foreigners coming to our country? They bring the words and games to play over our heads. They show no shame when the pictures they bring with them make us tremble. Didn't they see the news? Didn't they die in the crossing? Go tell them we, the lords of this land, the lords of Xibalbá, cannot them to perform according to our conventions in the theatres of our laws. In 7 days we shall send our home office team to play against the foreign twins a game we call the harrowing. It is a simple game, a forensic game, an interrogation game. Its final aim, acceptance of the outcome. 2. 7 days later, the twins, Hu and X, came before the officers in the Home Office's dark house. "Here is your sentence," said the officers. "You can read it, realize your lives are over, and succumb. You can even thank your interrogator for finally releasing you of your burden." "The rules of the game are quite simple," said the officers to the twins X and Hu. "Do not speak in pictures. Tell us believable stories." 3. "Tell stories?" sardonically said a twin. "I would if I could, but no longer can. People no longer dare crossing the threshold to the underworld where stories hail from. We have lost the elements of poetry and music, no longer know how to deal with mythic matter, and only a handful of writerly poets, in a handful of places, in this disenchanted world of ours, can summon enough plebeian courage to bring about new visions, experimental objects, or essays. We gave up on the inner life of the word, gave up on the world of the Nohor, relinquished our dream books and word cinemas. Instead, there are novels, perfectly crafted, best-selling novels, written with a mastery no one denies. But can the linear narrative on its own do justice to our stopgap migrant condition? Perhaps it can expose a truth in the light of forensic judgment, the light of today's industries of performance. But if exposure destroys its secret, as shaman Don Miguel says from ancient Amerindian wisdom, then how to bring about a revelation that does justice to it? We say secret, and we mean hidden truth. And when you equate secret and truth like this, it seems to me there is more than a hint of mystery and fate working in cahoots. So says the shaman. Consider dialectics and dialogue, first figured in the living language of a poetry to be declared aloud. The way one declares love, dramatizes an oath, declares it broken, the way young Achilles swore to protect dark-eyed Calchas, bearer of doom prophecy. Dialogue was relocated from that theatre's stage to the stage of the reader's mind, giving absolute rein to the adult's imagination of the child's imagination, which adjudged the latter to be fantasy, bearing the asymmetry of a different past. We say, let us bring critique fantastique back, dream books and word cinemas, which moderns declare relics of the past, and displaced onto a homogeneous empty space, archived in a final resting place to be protected from the perils of the present, in fact, burned or banned when daring to imagine futures otherwise. Imagine an instance of misrule by the adult's imagination of the child's imagination, inquisitors and officers commanding us to bow our heads to the west where the sun sets, and accept death triumphs, desire is betrayed, and dreams or utopias are mere counterfeit currency. In the New Pact, the poetries of critique fantastique and masque were flattened into plot, subjectivity into identity or character. This new pact with symmetry of plot collapsed all dimensions of literature into those of inner space and commerce. 4. Tell stories? Wonder the other twin? I would if I could, but we can't. People no longer dare crossing the threshold to the underworld where the stories hail from. We have lost the elements of poetry and music, no longer know how to deal with mythic matter, and only a handful of writerly poets in a handful of places in this disenchanted world can summon enough plebeian courage to bring about new visions, experimental objects, or essays. We gave up on the inner life of the word, gave up on the world of the Nohor, relinquished our dream books and word cinemas. Instead, we have novels, perfectly crafted novels, written with a mastery no one denies. We have televised news and melodramas. But in these novels, if a girl speaks to her dead sister, or a boy escapes into a ghost forest after the Nazis set their house on fire, if that boy or girl ran into woods, or escaped by sea from dystopia, or fell through a hole underground, leaving their body behind to be preserved at the bottom of the sea or in those woods for tomorrow's sake, rather than wait for death to take them today, and in that instant, how long is this instant, the sister's lifeless body seeps up to them from beneath and returns to subtle matter nuzzled in the crook of what once was their father's or mother's arm, so that fist balled against God, earth, sky high, that boy-girl weeps over bodies in their house of ice. His, her mouth, agape behind a hurricane, unable to react, mute, not willing to compute or relate the facts, then that is judged not to be true, isn't realism, couldn't count as high fidelity literature, nor be registered as what may be considered believable. Because today's industry of performance advises that the page or the camera be all seeing. The audience wants to see it all that matters, all that especially mattering. The panopticon of voyeurism. To be realistic and believable, today's industry of performance says, set aside onto a backwards space and time the other things that might not pass the test of the forensic eye of a Praetorian class. A flick of the hand, a gesture of wonder or surprise, a fleeting glance at the lens, and the take is rubbish. 5. Consider Charles Ovid of the White Earth Reservation. Many moons ago, no one knows how many, Charles Ovid, wordsmith of the Chippewa Nation, declared by his stories the preservation and survivance of his native presence. Before a federal court, in an autumn moon of more than no one knows how many moons ago, Charles Ovid raised his hand, listened to the Christian oath, broken many times, no one knows how many, spoken for the first time in the language of the Anishinaabe. He waved back his raised hand at U.S. District Judge Miles Lord, an ironic take on that oath, and spoke of natural reason and continental freedom, figured more than no one knows how many moons ago, when Coyote and Crow came together and for the first time spoke, weaving together sound and thought. He spoke from memory, shared with all matter shattered by the manifest violence of the colonizers, and, hailing all that matters, Charles Ovid opened for the judge his stories. In his stories, a further person, figured from visual presence, comes to presence. Old John Squirrel, a visual reminiscence of when he spoke of the right to wild rice harvest, manumin they called it, practiced many moons ago, no one knows how many, on the shores of Rice Lake in Minnesota, a practice spoken and agreed with the officers of the US government, no one knows how many, many moons ago, on the same shores. Charles Ovid said he was there when old John Squirrel met with the federal agents, submitted to their harrowing interrogations, responded from memory to their claims for evidence, and he listened carefully when, after the Inquisition officers told old John Squirrel that the White Earth Chippewa Nation would always keep its right to harvest wild rice on the shores of the Rice Lake Wildlife Refuge in Minnesota. Charles Ovid told Judge Lord that the Anishinaabe always invoked their rights by stories. He told Judge Lord that old John Squirrel was there in those stories, and by those same stories he was made present that day in court. John Squirrel is dead, Judge Lord said, looking down on the Anishinaabe wordsmith Charles Ovid from his judge's chair, and you cannot say what a dead man said. The Lord of the Court, Judge Miles Lord, could have heard in Ovid's testimony the visual trace and memory of that spoken agreement, but what he heard that day in court was hearsay and therefore unbelievable. Instead, Judge Lord sided with the federal attorney who had objected that in accordance with the forensic precision of inquisitorial procedure, only the law's theater of equal masks without presence can be admitted to be timeless and unchangeable. There is no room in the borough for poetry or stories. 6. The harrowing, interrogators, the Inquisition, agents of the Home Office, U.S. federal agents, Judge Lord, the Lords of Xibalbá, and the bird demon Bukub Kakwix are more than characters. They embody the architecture, the framework, manners, theater, and creed of a society and show to us what happens when that society descends into a cult of architecture, manners, theater, and creed in which no room is left for poetic memory and stories. If a novel cannot show or relate to us that other reality, if it cannot make room for the rhythm of poetic memory, the music of its landscape, if it sides instead with Judge Lord, deaf to the connection of the dead and the living, and builds only monuments on the page, all the worse for the novel. No matter how loudly the novel declares itself realist, addressing the gaze of a disembodied audience, self-referencing and distant placards over its head, at the very least the novel will have to be reinvented. It would be best for literature and for society, if it stammers, if the novel fails, hesitates, giving us time to think, which is memory, and life, which is what the life of the word is. Living memory, not silent monuments. Stammers are resonances, allowing for time's transit, carrying the long past on into a future otherwise than it was, transforming that resonance to make us pause and hesitate. Its reverb moving in a wave to make something happen in us that can no longer wait. They show us the way to static ideas, principles, or new beginnings with the force to carry into and create another future. If they show the way to utopia, that is not what utopia should look like. Let understanding stop at what cannot be understood. That would be a high achievement.